Good morning. Thank you all who have joined us. We start the presentation of the Belarusian Change Tracker devoted to the forthcoming presidential election in Belarus. It has been prepared with the Friedrich Ebert Foundation with the technical support of Press Club Belarus. The outcomes of the report will be presented by head of Sans Analytics CEO Artyom Shraibman, Lev Lvovskiy from Belarus, Henadz Korshunau from Center of New Ideas, Alesia Rudnik from the Center of New Ideas, and Philipp Bikanau, who is an independent sociologist. I would like to remind you that you can text your questions in the chat, and we will do our best to answer them. And Christopher Forst will be the first presenter, who is the representative of the FAS Foundation for Belarus. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us today for the launch of the special election edition of the Belarus Change Tracker. As Germany's oldest political foundation committed to the values of social democracy, AVS decided to support this extra edition of the Belarus Change Tracker as it gives us a unique chance. Right now, international media is paying attention to Belarus and trying to report what's going on in this very moment. And of course, the expert community knows the answer, at least in broad terms, not much. But this increased attention is a great opportunity to do what the Belarus Change Tracker always does and reach new audiences whom the approach of our experts could really help to make sense of what's going on now, why the answer is not much, and what's there to expect in the future. So please spread the findings. You will receive a link to the final publication. Make sure that our experts can help to improve analyses of the current situation in Belarus by providing a holistic and concise overview of developments in recent months. If journalists read only one publication to prepare for interviews they will conduct this weekend, for opinion pieces and so on, this publication could be it. And of course, we also hope that political actors, democratic Belarusian forces, as well as politicians and diplomats from other countries may find the information and analyses provided useful. Especially since we'll also have some fresh data for you once again. The topics we'll mention today are manifold. Many of them are linked with each other. I will really just briefly mention a few. Attempts by the regime to gain international recognition, Western reactions to diplomatic gestures, as well as continued sanctions, the ongoing repressions, of course, the situation of political prisoners and amnesties, the regime's relationship with Russia and the desire to keep as much room of maneuver as possible, the economic development and the outlook for 2025, the regime's narratives during the election campaign, the development of trust in authorities, as well as what Belarusians think about the ongoing war in Ukraine and the role Belarus plays in Russia's war of aggression. There will be no major surprises on Sunday, but maybe at least some of the findings will give you some, let's say, positive food for thought, albeit I must admit the overall situation still absolutely does not provide for any kind of joy. But let us nonetheless look to the coming months and years as another opportunity to change Belarus for the better, rather than just 5 more years of the same. There will be an opportunity for questions. Please do not hesitate to address our experts, including on topics not mentioned in this edition of the Belarus Change Tracker, as long as you find them relevant ahead of the so-called presidential elections. I would like to wholeheartedly thank the 5 experts for their excellent work, as well as the Press Club Belarus for supporting this launch, and my colleague Taras for the work he has put into this project. I wish you an interesting launch now, and as I said initially, please spread the word. Thank you.
Спасибо Кристоферу. А презентацию открывает Артем Шрайбман.
And Artyom Shraibman is going to make the next presentation. And thank you very much, Christopher, for your opening remarks. Artyom, the floor is yours. Yes, I'm sorry. I can hear it with a little delay. I stayed in the Russian channel. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for connecting, and thank you all connecting us to this broadcast in YouTube. I would like, first of all, to appreciate the Ebert Foundation for supporting us and for trusting in us again. I would like to dwell on 2 dimensions, trends in 2 fields. It's important to understand that our current reporting covers quite a broad period, 7 months of 2024 from June till December. And therefore, many of the trends have matured. Unlike many of our previous reports, right now we can see our outcomes for a long time. And I'm going to dwell on foreign policy, where I replace Pavel Slunkin, who is expected to be back soon, I hope, and then we will dive into domestic policy. Speaking of foreign policy, in these 7 months, probably one of the most outstanding trends was a proactive engagement of Belarus in the military initiatives of Russia and in military and strategic initiatives of a higher tier rather than Belarus used to be engaged before in the warfare. There were some local achievements of integration of technical and economical aspects, like mutual recognition of electronic signatures approved by both governments in September, or signing a document on the common market of energy, or roaming prohibition. But all these things evaporate against the backdrop of the volume of agreements in the field of security. In early June, parties had military exercises of nuclear weapons. Then the doctrine of Russia was expanded to cover Belarus, including the nuclear umbrella. This surely does not mean quality changes in the current cooperation, because placement of nuclear warheads in Belarus was announced in 2023, and security guarantees were enlisted and enshrined in the previously signed documents. But placing Belarus in the Russian doctrine means that Russia sees Belarus not as just one of the ordinary partners, but as a full-fledged site for chaperoning and protection. And the concept of the Union State and the concept of security and the doctrine have been assigned, including the coverage of nuclear weapons. And in addition, the intercontinental ballistic missile Oreshnik is going to be deployed in Belarus according to Putin's decision. And this means that Russia finds new formats to use Belarus and its territory to ensure the nuclear chantage of the West and for expanding its influence. Second, the West is proactively invited to dialogue with Minsk. Minsk signals this willingness against the backdrop of deteriorating relations. During the report period, Minsk, for 8 times at least, released groups of prisoners, and a few pardons happened after New Year, which was outside of our reporting period. Despite the fact that the Belarusian authorities invited the West to participate in negotiations on the migration crisis, they organized a special conference. And I would like to highlight that this conference was to nudge neighboring countries to dialogue. All of these signals have been neglected or not perceived by the neighboring countries as serious, and there is no real response. They would either ignore or they would tweet and make statements through their foreign services mentioning pardons, but the problem is still there for the West to undergo changes. If we look at the measures adopted by the Western countries, by the Western bloc for the last 7 months or the second half year of 2024, then this was aggravation of sanctions. In early July, Lithuania introduced a ban on cars and food coming from Belarus. And then in the end of July, the European Union coordinated sanctions about Russia and Belarus in order to restrict goods on the eve of elections of 2020. UK, Canada, Switzerland, and European countries expanded their personal sanctions, and at last in December, another portfolio of sanctions against judges, business people, and a few enterprises were adopted. Lithuania and Poland expanded their unilateral sanctions against various sectors of the Belarusian economy, and in September, Lithuania went even further in its sanctions policy, and they forwarded the files to the International Criminal Court to open a case on the Belarusian uh, civil servants for committing crimes against humanity. And the signals of the Belarusian side and the response of the West show the clear distinction between the visions of what should be done in order to normalize relations between the West and Belarus. Well, at least when we publish this change tracker, that's the situation. The third track is that Minsk tries to normalize or to intensify relations with the global South. Minsk loves calling it the global majority. And here we should note not only the traditional for the last year visits of Lukashenko to the far countries from Mongolia to Oman and Pakistan and Arab Emirates and visiting North Korea, but also multilateral diplomacy was also active for Belarus. Belarus was adopted to SEO, BRICS. Within our reporting period, Belarus participated in the CSTO summits, and at all these platforms, the Belarusian side has been articulating a similar number of theses. That first, isolation of Belarus failed, because you can see how many countries are willing to sustain and develop relations and raise our representation in the organizations. And there's a new trend of this season. These are the calls to unite forces against the Western prevalence. And Belarus stresses this at various forums organized internationally. And in Belarus, the Eurasian Security Conference is organized usually in the end of the year in Belarus. Repeat the calls for non-Western countries to create and establish joint institutions to counterbalance the institutions dominated by the West. This is about security agreements, and alternative financial institutions. These attempts of Minsk have very modest outcomes, but they are doing their best. And Minsk says that it would like to be the hub for consolidating the efforts against the Western countries. The Conference of Eurasian Security was organized in Minsk, and in November, Lukashenko invited the heads of CSTO, ASEAN, SCO, CIS to come to Minsk to coordinate their efforts. And this is to counterbalance some formats of integration or the formats of international cooperation with the participation of Western countries. And the fourth trend is about the democratic forces of Belarus. No significant changes have been seen within the reporting period. They continued their diplomatic work around traditional themes like lobbying new sanctions against Minsk and international prosecution of its officials, and also reminding partners about the problem of political prisoners and the preventing of legitimization of Lukashenko's regime and its electoral procedures. That's the keynote message of the Belarusian democratic forces in their communications, and also countering discrimination of Belarusian nationals when crossing the EU borders and inside the EU countries, and not only the EU countries, because there were multiple examples of such consultations of the democratic forces with the neighboring countries on how to apply sanctions, how to restrict mobility, what exceptions should be made for Belarusians. We draft this in our report, and I believe that the journalists who are present in this webinar do not require reminders. And also in the communication of the democratic forces, we can also see some evolution because the political prisoners swap that happened earlier between Russia and the West, and also pardoning, a series of pardoned political prisoners, urged active discussions in the Belarusian democratic forces on the strategy of them and of the West on how to release political prisoners and possible negotiations using or not using the leverage of sanctions. Still, the leading group, the Office of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and the Coordination Council support the idea of sanctions, but in recent months we can see an active consolidation of forces, of groups of people who support proactive and more flexible policy about releasing political prisoners. They are speaking about parallel lobbying, and the ex-presenter, ex-speaker of the Coordination Council, Andrei Yegorov, in August and Vilnius announced that, and then he actually proposed to forward the European ambassadors to official Minsk, and Valery Gornonova and Tatiana Khomich, the sister of Maria Kalesnikova, visited a few Western countries where they promoted the alternative vision of this issue. So they reiterated the necessity to negotiate with Lukashenko's regime, and Andrei Dmitriev, who has been released from prison, who was the presidential candidate during the previous election, also toured across European capitals, delivering the same message, and then coming down to domestic policy, because we are done with the foreign policy. Speaking of domestic policies, here the electoral campaign is the main thing, and in fact this continues the trend of the recent years, of at least 3 recent years, when the electoral procedures were abandoning even decorative ornaments of democracy. Belarusian elections have never been democratic, but there was a certain degree of symbolic pluralism or temporary pluralism that authorities allowed. Today, this is to the minimum. It's the lowest. The list of the presidential candidates and the composition of the electoral committees do not envisage any engagement of the democratic forces, democratic voices, or opposition. Even alternative candidates that were allowed to participate, they keep reminding the audience that they are supporting the president of Belarus. I have not seen any of them criticizing the authorities of Belarus. This has never been in the history of election campaigns in Belarus for none of the presidential candidates to criticize the authorities, even using some general wording. The authorities have stopped, considering that they should be limiting or hiding the spending of government resources to support Lukashenko, and the marathon of unity, the series of concerts, shows, and discussion platforms in dozens of cities of Belarus enjoy that, and the government allocates money for that, and regions of Belarus compete on who will have more votes for Lukashenko. You know, the flash mob called you. You have to. And we know that various teams from various companies and organizations supported that, and we can see that the competition elements in the election, and even the elements of policy that existed prior to 2020, have converted into a bureaucratic normality. The second thing clearly seen in domestic policy was the new level of Lukashenko's cult. In the reporting period, there were 2 events. First of all, the 30th anniversary of his ruling, and the authorities celebrated this on a large scale, and the electoral campaign which has started in our reporting period. In this section of the report, I provide multiple examples that cause various emotions in readers, but they seem quite funny. I will mention the most outstanding ones on the eve of the 30th anniversary of Lukashenko's power. The authorities received the guidelines on how to deliver the message that it was important to have such a leader as Lukashenko. His portraits were placed on walls across the country. Grigory Azaryonok, a government propagandist, launched the Word and Deeds initiative, where Lukashenko was compared to Jesus Christ, and some of them called Belarusian Khamenei. Also, they proposed to award the hero of Belarus status to him. The head of Lukashenko's administration said that in July, God sent storms to Belarus in order for God to really love God sent storms on Belarus in July in order for Lukashenko to enjoy to what extent Belarus has been prepared to them. But also the first lesson in schools in September was proposed to organize a class on ruling of Lukashenko the day of unity, enjoyed the ballad on dictator, which was a song on the stage. Now the authorities believe that this is a significant part of their mandate to demonstrate to the most active degree that they support Lukashenko and that he has been selected by God. And this report provides many more examples. And we can envisage and assume that due to the forthcoming events, and he's certainly predicted a victory in the election, and because of the inauguration, this trend will continue. The next trend is the renewing of the nomenclature before election and fluctuating influence of security officials. We can see multifaceted changes. They are not in one stream. In June 2024, Lukashenko updated the security bloc of officers. Marat Markov, the Minister of Information, Maxim Rezhenkov, new Foreign Minister, Natalia Petkevich, Deputy Head of Administration, and Dmitry Kurtoy became the head of the Presidential Administration. These people are usually known as proactive or more active and more authoritarian than their predecessors. We can speculate about the reasons for shuffling the nomenclature at the top level, but we believe that Lukashenko wants to refresh the nomenclature before the election campaign in order to make it more dynamic. And there are other fluctuations in the security bloc. Last time we paid attention to Nikolai Karpenkov's activity, and he is the Deputy Minister of Interior or Police, and this has stopped after Karpenkov speculated about the Wagner Group in Belarus. After that, he established his own humanitarian foundation and disclosed it in the public media. And in summertime, his presence in the media was to the minimum. Only routine official news was on Karpenkov participating in some hotline or awarding the red hats to his officers or attending some other events, but nothing else. Even his information ally, who used to take interviews from him, Grigor Azaryonok, he has not been coming to Karpenkov for interviews anymore. And the role of another influencing security officer, Shved, his name is Shved, who is the prosecution general, has been expanding his power outside the boundaries of their mandate. They have already been chaperoning the commission of reviewing the cases of political prisoners who would like to get back to Belarus from abroad. And this commission has started reviewing the cases, and this has been this has been awarded to them by the Lukashenko's decree. In mid-September, Lukashenko issued a decree formalizing the powers of Shved's commission, although Belarus already has a permanent part in commission under Lukashenko, delegating procedures on forgiving politically disloyal immigrants, athletes, and political prisoners in this way to a separate body highlights the special role played by this commission and its head in the Belarusian regime. And now the next trend in the domestic policy, we can see the ideological consolidation of Tikhanovskaya's structures. This goes down not only to her structure on the office and cabinet, but also on the United Transitional Cabinet. There is a majority that fully supports the agenda of the office and cabinet of Tikhanovskaya, and by autumn, the oppositional group of delegates stopped showing activity in the public domain. This idea, consolidation or ideological consolidation, resulted in them calling Tikhanovskaya as a national leader, that her mandate would not expire at the end of the election campaign in 2025. And this trend is supported by the fact that the figures left who had other views. Many people left the structure, 4 people who left the cabinet, Sakhashik, Kovalevsky, Karbonova, and Koshik, and 2 of them really left because of the disagreement with the main agenda of the cabinet, I mean Karbonova and Kovalevsky. And later, they were proactive in lobbying another agenda, tactics, and strategy of the opposition. We can see that the supporters of more comprehensive approaches to the Belarusian regime, they are still in the democratic forces, but they are on the marginal line, or they have been beyond these borders. And the last thing I would like to say is that the political subjectivity of the democratic forces' hawkish flank has been deteriorating due to the turbulent leadership change in the Kastus-Kalinovsky regime in July, resulted in increased control by the Ukrainian military command over various aspects of the unit's functioning, including recruitment. And we believe that this raises a question whether we should still believe that the Kastus-Kalinovsky regiment is an actor of the Belarusian policy, but not public life, and the other wings of this flank, like Pospolita, Rushnya, Suprativ, Free Belarus, Cyber Partisans, Ruch Belarusskich Nationalistov, showed no noticeable political activity in the reporting period. However, many of them had the veterans of the Belarusian military units. Sorry for taking that long, and I will disconnect from you now, and then I will connect later for Q&A. Thank you very much, and we pass the floor to Lev Lvovskiy. Yes, thank you very much to all our listeners, and thank you for your attention to the Belarusian trends. And we really appreciate those who have supported the organization of this issue of Tracker. And I appreciate Christopher Frost and Taras Mikhalnyuk from the Press Foundation. Thank you very much. I'm going to dwell on the trends in the domestic economy and in foreign economic relations, but let us start with the domestic economy. The key trend of the current season of this reporting period is the stagnation. In the first half year, in the first 4 to 5 months, we could see a very rapid, non-typical for Belarus economical growth. In the first 4 months, the economy accelerated to 4%, and then starting from May, we entered the stagnation season. And there were no other sources for further growth but still, since the economy is pumped up and there is a significant external and domestic demand, the economy is not drowning but stays at the same level. In the first half year, the main source of growth was the industrial sector, the production sector. That's the sector that responds to Russia's demand, and that's the sector that is impacted by the public fiscal policy. And in the second half year, the main sector to support the same level of growth achieved in the first half year was the sector of domestic demand, retail and trade, and domestic demand for goods and services. And also, speaking of the macroeconomic trends, if we speak about different sectors, then an important event of the reporting period was the beginning of rebuilding the IT sector. The growth in this sector is still not as high and not sustainable as it used to be before all the sanctions and political events, but nevertheless, this sector stopped dropping and has entered a stage of unstable growth. Another trend in the reporting period was the discussion and practice of the administrative price control system. In fact, during this period, civil servants started using softer words about the prospects of the administrative price controls. On November 1st, it was an important date. For the first time, Stopkov, a Belarusian bureaucrat, acknowledged that there were negative effects of administrative price controls, and he even assumed that in the future that system could be made loose or abandoned at all. This is like expressing the expectations that this policy will change. However, Lukashenko said nothing should be made loose. We should study the Soviet time practice of price control, administration, and control. So it looks like price control will stay with us. But during the reporting period, we can see the consequences. The most suffering sector is the retail sector. The overheads grow in this sector, and the majority of the goods are subjected to administrative price controls, and the retail sector cannot diversify, cannot enter other markets, cannot find profits in other places. Therefore, the retail sector is the leader in official bankruptcies. Over the reporting period, over 12 large retail chains and 300 smaller retailers filed for bankruptcy. We can be speaking about some grocery stores where there's one store per community. Another sector that suffers under this price control system is the sector of agriculture. Our agricultural sector procures lots of stuff from abroad, means various veterinary drugs, feed for cattle, and also some breeding animals, and they can only sell their produce under controlled prices in Belarus, or they can sell to Russia at any price. But in Russia, they are allowed to sell only part of their produce. Therefore, the agricultural sector and agricultural producers can see problems. This year, the yield of potatoes yielded 35% less than before. Vegetables yielded 9.5% less than before. But what can be explained only by the impact of the administrative price controls or by any other administrative impact is the number of pigs that fell by 10% across the country, and and the large issues with livestock, but these problems are not as severe as in case of pigs. And we do not speak about hunger. We do not speak about the scenario described in Alexander Chernukhov's book called Pigs When All Pigs Disappeared from Belarus. But still, this is a significant trend that outstands. And moreover, this 10% decrease, which is a formally acknowledged figure, and some other negative factors can be standing behind. And the next trend that can be seen in this reporting period, this is the echo of the previous trend. This is what I call the treasury needs sacrifice. So we can see that the costs of the budget exceed the revenues. The same was in 2023, 24, and the same budget deficit is planned for 2025. And the budget should be replenished by fines, introduction of new taxes. Sometimes they speak about some ridiculous small amounts and ideas like we should introduce a tax on tips. So this is not about macroeconomically significant figures, but all civil servants and their sectors sniff around to see what other taxes could be introduced to anybody. New fines are introduced to various companies, especially large businesses. A huge fine was issued to the Finnish brewers who own one of the brewing companies in Belarus. In this same period, A1 mobile provider had a huge fine. The problems of the fiscal problems have started facing even those entrepreneurs who have been always close to authorities. For example, the Courage brothers faced issues. They suffer from sanctions internationally, and they suffer from these things domestically in Belarus because the authorities have questions to them. Now, speaking about the external foreign economic relations, then the key trend is that there's a failure on the far arc. Artyom Shraibman has already said that there was a lot of foreign economic activity of the Belarusian regime, but Artyom highlights a political success or relative success in politics. But from the economic point of view, I can see a failure. Indeed, they had many meetings at the highest level. Lukashenko visited Pakistan. Belarus was attended by the second top officer of China, a very high level. Lots of agreements have been concluded with Uganda, Botswana, Angola, Nicaragua, Serbia. But at that, all these relations have never brought any economic fruit. There are many agreements concluded with poor countries. They cannot buy or sell. We can sign 1,000 of agreements with Angola, but they will have no money to buy even 100 of tractors. There's another story about China. Naturally, China has lots of cash potentially, but the thing is that China, despite the formerly perfect relations with Alexander Lukashenko, still sees the economic relations to deserve better. China is top 5 in foreign direct investment into Belarus. When the Prime Minister of China visited Belarus, he was awarded he was given a menu of various projects worth of 3 billion. He rejected the majority of them at once, and he promised to think about projects worth of $1 billion, but he has not even concluded those. He just promised to think of it. And we have not seen this billion whatsoever. And in 2023, Russia enjoyed 65 of Belarusian exports, then 10% was the United Arab Emirates. It was not real exports. Belarus did not export its goods to the United Arab Emirates. Belarus was reselling oil products, and China was top three with 5%. This means that diversification of foreign economic relations is very small. In 2024, the target was to improve diversification, but it failed. At the beginning of the year, some figures improved, and then after October, the exports outside CIS dropped again for a few dozens of percent in 2024. Ultimately, we will see the same frustrating picture where we mostly trade with Russia. We export some petroleum products, and the rest of commodities are not distributed to other countries, in fact. And the next foreign economic trend in foreign economic relations that we observe is the significant companies continue their exodus. I mock this trend because when a business liquidates, it's certainly bad, but when a significant foreign company has an exodus, it exits with some know-hows, international standards, and access to state-of-the-art technologies. I would mock the selling of Prior Bank to new owners during the reporting period. Carl Zeiss from Germany leaving Belarus, and it's an optical company, and the company called Inform, a pharmaceutical manufacturer. And we can also see another trend of the relations between the Belarusian regime, the Belarusian economy, and Russia. Here, Russia certainly continued to subsidize Belarusian economy at the levels achieved in previous periods, but for Alexander Lukashenko, for Belarus, it was not good enough. And we could see many attempts. Vladimir Putin, for some reason, probably for political reasons, does not want to issue new cash loans to Belarus. And we can see funny situations when Alexander Lukashenko every second month finds another reason, a new cover to try to get money from the Russian Federation. One day he said we would assemble Russian airplanes in Russia. Putin did not bite it. And then he asked a loan to build CHPs running on local fuel like wood pellets and other stuff. But it was very doubtful project, and Putin did not give money. Then he started speaking about the second NPP. The first NPP in Belarus is still not sourcing. Is not giving electricity to the grid, but Lukashenko says that we need 6 billion again to build a new NPP. But we can see that Putin is not really interested in any of these projects, and that the budget for next year, for 2025, has been designed envisaging a budget deficit, and part of the deficit is assumed to be covered by the Russian loan. However, this loan has not been endorsed yet. That's the end of my part, and I pass the floor to my colleagues. Thank you, Lev, very much. I would like to remind you that if you have any questions to our presenters, please write them in the chat of the broadcast. And now we are passing the floor to Henadz Korshunau, the program director of the Belarusian Academy and the senior researcher of the Center for New Ideas. Hello, thank you. I would like to appreciate all those who have supported this issue of the Belarus Change Tracker. And I also welcome all those present here. And I would like to present my part, which is called Relations between the Authorities and Society. There will be four key trends. The first one can be called as randomness and a system of pressuring society. What does that mean? I would like to start by saying that, like in the previous periods, a regime continues to systemically and methodically persecute any manifestations of independent initiatives and self-organizations in Belarusian society. The structures and initiatives of diverse profiles and activity areas are included in the list of extremist materials and extremist formations and either liquidated or forced to liquidate. However, it is increasingly difficult to find clear criteria for these practices. For example, the list of liquidated organizations included Victory 1945, a fund of supporting WW2 veterans and concentration camp prisoners, the Public Association Belarusian Federation of American Football, the local fund for supporting forced migrants, Interactia, the local charity Action to Help Chernobyl, the Public Association Belarusian Society of Neurosurgeons, and the like. The same applies to the low-tier institutions. They are called extremists and on a large scale. Among others, we can see that the extremist materials were the chats on the situation on the Belarusian state borders, the School for Women, the initiatives like being active is nice. So the inclusion of some items in the extremist lists is in order for the society to ensure self-censorship, for the society to stop using any non-government sources of information. So the authorities say that, quote, unsubscribe from anything that you don't need, end of quote. Speaking of the future, we can forecast that the intensity of including materials into the extremist lists will drop because there will be nothing else to include in these extremist lists. There is still a plan to replenish this list of extremist materials, and we can see that the authorities can hardly find anything new to include in this list, and they grab actually anything. The next trend is the repressive and coercive preparation for the election. This used to happen before, but right now there's the following thing. The electoral modality of the reporting period plays its role. What do we have here? Apart from self-censorship, that's the new trend. There's a typical pressure on the media space. The authorities continue including media in the lists of extremist materials. They block online resources, and on the other hand, they expand the coverage. For example, they stop blocking entire platforms like LiveJournal, which is not really popular in Belarus anymore, and YouTube. It's not for the first time, but we can see that this thing becomes more systemic, and we expect that internet will be blocked for the election day, which on the one hand was the thing that Lukashenko used to threaten, and second, he said that that would happen in case of protest. We assume that internet will be closed for the election day. And there's also the coercion to certain activities. During the report period, we can see that by any excuse and by using threats, the threats of firing, people were forced to put signatures for the presidential candidates. And it's important because we have never had it before. Right now, we can see that people have been urged and coerced and forced to put signatures not only for Lukashenko as the presidential candidate, but for other presidential candidates too. So we can state that this election campaign is rigged. What else? Speaking of threats and coercion to various activities, for example, preventive threatening of the potentially protest constituencies. Whether these people have been prosecuted or not, whether these people were imprisoned or not, but the people are urged to and forced to sign a statement that they would not engage in any anti-government activities. And also, law enforcers have been exercising to fight protests and other activities. And also, the law enforcers of Belarus have been expanding their cooperation with Russia. All of these things happen amid the third trend, which is the increasing level of reprisals. Indeed, speaking of political repressions, we can say that there was this series of pardons, and today is another day when another installment of political prisoners are released. This is wave number 10, but this has hardly affected the repressive level in the society, the level of reprisals in the society. We have received information from uh, human rights defenders and the authorities. We can see that in Q4 2024, there was a growth of 74% of political reprisals as compared to Q3. The number of administrative cases and of criminal cases has been increasing. That's probably the most challenging thing. The criminal prosecution of political opponents of the regime, that's the most threatening trend. We can see that the growth of the number of criminal cases has been happening throughout the whole year. In Q4 versus Q3 was 8%. And previously, it was a 4% growth. So we can see that the number of criminal cases has been growing. There's another repression practice. This is prosecuting and those people who are located, who reside abroad. This means that the authorities want to show that they transfer the pressure of reprisals from Belarus to those who are abroad, at least for them to feel it. And this is seen in the targeted pursuit and hunting of those who are former Kalinovsky Regiment warriors and political activists and those who left the country, and also the pressure on the family members of those who left the country. I'm not speaking about politicians or outstanding political figures. We speak about ordinary representatives of Belarusians abroad. Through their relatives can happen at the border crossing when the relatives of these people are forced by Belarusian authorities to address their relatives who reside abroad to come back to Belarus to apply for pardon to the Committee on Pardoning those who are in exile. And there's another trend of expanding scale of reprisals in the regions of the country. We can see this through the pressure on small original countryside media outlets who have not been writing about politics for the last few years or never at all. We can see this in Baranovichi and Orsha and in other communities. We can see a growing scale of reprisals in the regions of the country, not even in Minsk. And the last trend, right now we can highlight the trend of silencing and intimidating as a background of ongoing repression. I want to say that the authorities want to portray as if the reprisals inside the country have smaller scale, that the enemies are abroad. For example, starting from October, the authorities stopped broadcasting the videos of those detained. Then they got back to the practice, but there was an evident fact of them slowing this down. Next, we can see that district police stations started hearing cases without putting cases in the court schedules. So, human rights defenders find it difficult now to keep track of cases, to make independent data collection and analysis. So authorities try to hide these court hearings. Third, those convicted under the political articles are increasingly not provided with the copies of court records and judgments. So these people are deprived of the opportunity to appeal against the court ruling and even to prove the fact of their persecution for political reasons. And fourth, human rights advocates are aware of mass invitations for civil activists from non-prohibited and legally functioning organizations throughout the country to attend conversations with the KGB. At these conversations, activists were warned about criminal proceedings against them if any information or statement about the pressure on them would get into the media. So they would face criminal prosecution. All these facts suggest that the Belarusian regime is currently taking certain actions to conceal the real level of pressure on society, and the authorities try to mock the situation and to hide these reprisals. This is it from my side. Thank you. Over to you. You're on mute. Raisa, please unmute yourself. Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you, Henadz. I would like to remind you that you can ask your questions in the chat. And now I'm passing the floor to the director of the Center for New Ideas, Alesia Rudnik. Thank you very much. I echo my colleagues who appreciated their words of thanks to those who have enabled this issue of the Belarus Change Tracker. And I appreciate my colleagues. And certainly we would be able to give more information if we knew more of what was happening inside the political regime. What information we get is what we get through political communication. And this is my section in the change tracker. I can see how various political ambitions and changes and political processes how they are delivered by democratic forces and authorities. In my short presentation, I would like to describe this period and what new things the pro-democratic and the authority speakers focused on. As last time, we would like to pay attention to the largest narratives that shape the political agenda, and we try to understand what these political narratives reflect, what political trends they can reflect. Unlike the previous change tracker, we did not do our own analysis of the data, but we monitored the projects that appeared in the last half year that keep track of political communications, including quantity measurements. And the people who make these projects should be appreciated, Media QI Sense and the Sense Analytics, and our own project under the Center for New Ideas. And all of these projects have become the ground for political conclusions that shaped this section of the report. I will not procrastinate. I will switch to the three trends and a little note and the conclusions. First conclusion. During this report period, we can see that the polarization of political communication remains, but a decrease in its intensity is possible after the election. We mentioned this during our previous report that there was a significant polarization between various political actors. Artyom Shraibman has already dwelled on that. There are certain trends associated with the response to pardoning political prisoners because certain political figures left the oppositional forces. There's a standalone political track. All of that um, enables us to see a decreasing temperature in political communication. And this is a recent trend, a fresh trend. And still, this is not clear whether this trend will be interrupted by the election that we will see on Sunday. Speaking of polarization, the key trend continues. Two political blocs continue to discredit one another significantly, and that they use various tactics. The authorities use hate speech to a large extent. They use various curses towards oppositional and democratic speakers, and all the failures in the country uh, are blamed on them, and all the gains are the courtesy of Lukashenko and the authorities. Lukashenko is promoted as the guarantor of stability. The West is accused of pressuring Belarus through sanctions and other maneuvers, and the oppositional speakers and oppositional forces speak about the legitimacy of powers, about the necessity of real political reforms in the country. At that, we can see some signals that indicate that there are attempts to lower the tension. And one of these signals in political communication was the incommunicado stopped for at least two known political prisoners, Maria Kalesnikova and Viktor Babarika. We could see their interviews and pictures. The mediator in this political communication was Roman Protasevich, who used to or who has become an important political figure in communications between the authorities and the democratic forces, and he's on the side of the authorities. We cannot say that this is a systemic trend. The authorities depicted two political prisoners who were incommunicado for a long time. We cannot say that this is going to be a systemic change, that we will enjoy this in case of many other political prisoners, but no. We could also see the interviews with political prisoners, Igor Losik, Yuri Zinkovich, and a number of other individuals. This means that it's important that for the pro-government speakers, it's important to prove that at least these people are alive. What's the purpose of this on the side of the authorities is unclear, but Lukashenko himself used to say that this strategy has no signal. It's not a signal to the West. There's an interview to BBC where he noted that from July 2024, 207 people were pardoned, and or even more, starting from today. And the regime has been promoting these pardons and releases in their communications. And that, as noted earlier, this has become a reason for discussion and disputes and disagreements between political opponents and activists. We can also mention the figures who raised the agenda of political prisoners in the political domain, or who promote dialogue. These are the figures like Artyom Shraibman, Valery Lvovskiy, Olga Karbonova, as Artyom Shraibman said, and there were attempts towards dialogue made by Andrei Dmitriev, and Roman Protasevich can also be referred to the group of mediators, if we're there to do so, because he tries to match the needs of the oppositional speakers and the policy of pro-government actors in Belarus, and he becomes a mediator who allegedly uh, brings people out of incommunicado regime for their life to be shown. Another thing that should be marked is the remaining trend. We call it a trend. The forthcoming election campaign was supposed to grow the number of publications on the forthcoming election, and it seems to all of us that there's the nada or you must flash mob and others, but speaking of the scope measured by a number of monitoring projects, we can still see that the main narrative of the pro-government speakers is the war in Ukraine. There are many explanations to that, but I believe that the main reason is that still the authorities try to stress what happens in other countries, so they distract attention from what's happening inside the country. In addition, this can also be a proof of the thesis mentioned by Artyom earlier. This is the routinization of election processes, which means that the election campaign is not seen as a unique event deserving all attention. So many monitoring projects, the Center of New Ideas last month presented a survey outcome. More than half of publications in Telegram are on the war in Ukraine. Therefore, the topic of the war, just like in the previous change tracker, remains to be the key note. It justifies domestic reprisals, necessity to increase security and safety, uh, accusations of the West that uses Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, to weaken Belarus, explaining that the unique positioning of Belarus enables to keep peace, and when the oppositional forces speak about the war topic, they stress the humanitarian aspect, the consequences for Ukrainian citizens, and the calls to stop Russian aggression. It's important to stress that many monitoring projects, many issues of the monitoring projects have been saying that this time the attention to integration with Russia has been lesser. However, in the political domain, we can still see the meetings and the active political decisions in this domain. In addition, the topic of the war clearly shows the dependence of the Belarusian political agenda on the Russian political agenda, where they portray this as withstanding the West, and the election campaign, as said, has not become the key topic, but expanded the number of publications on the election last month. And this is focused on the personality of Lukashenko, on his achievements, on his support. And as Artyom said, other candidates support Lukashenko. They have not been criticizing him, even to the smallest degree. Therefore, all the support is granted to the leader of the pro-government bloc, and democratic forces responded to that. On the day of announcing the election, they adopted a common statement. They urged the Belarusian citizens to vote against all candidates. However, this opinion has been criticized, and democratic forces had different opinions on that. And also, there were various flash mobs on online platforms. More resources were devoted to integrate the administrative resource in order for more and more citizens to express their support to the authorities and to Lukashenko in particular. The last thing I would like to mark, this is another trend. This is the trend of humanizing Lukashenko. Lukashenko's humanity and anti-Western rhetoric. First of all, stopping the incommunicado regime for Kolesnikova and Babarika, certainly pardoning political prisoners, and despite the fact that the authorities and Lukashenko neglect the fact that these are signals to the West to start negotiations or to start liberalization. Still, the very fact that these events have been heavily discussed by the public media, this means that they do have this intention. However, when highlighting these events, Lukashenko is positioned as a humane ruler, that this has been done due to the goodwill of Lukashenko, and these ornaments, these decorations of the process of pardoning political prisoners and stopping the incommunicado regime is perceived by as the good will sign of Lukashenko. And probably we should note that we looked at the formats of the content as before, at the Russian trace in disinformation and misinformation. We can see that government and pro-government media use pro-Russian narratives in order to shape public opinion, and also using the data, using classified data, we could see how disinformation and misinformation is used to discredit opponents, how to create mock external threats. And speaking of misinformation, we can see lots of things. There are many details of that. Many things are simply copy pasted from Russian media, uh, especially texts on the war in Ukraine. Uh, and this has been expanding. The Russian trace can clearly be seen in Belarusian media. Many Belarusian narratives if replicate the Russian government narratives. We have not really measured that, but if we measure, this will be the case, and we state our general observations. Belarusian media duplicate the narratives of Russian propaganda. It's not only about the war in Ukraine, but about portraying the West as an enemy, and certainly discreditation of the opponents. So therefore, despite the fact that the key narratives remained, the political communications focused on new things during the report period, including the signals of the willingness to decrease politicization, and also the key players do not state that they are ready to make these steps. And the questions are whether these political communication changes will lead to any changes in the political system, or maybe this is just a rhetoric. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Lisa. And now we're passing the floor to Philipp Bikanau, an independent sociologist, who will wrap up our meeting today. Hello, colleagues. Thank you very much for your interest to our change tracker. I'm very happy to see so many guests here and attendees. My friends were speaking about trends for thawing and about nice economic things, but I'm going to spoil your mood because we are going to be speaking about the public opinion changes in Belarus, and I have prepared, as always, a small presentation. Let me share it on the screen.
Я думаю, что вот так можно.
I believe we can do it this way.
Видно без предпросмотра, по идее, должно быть. Да, поехали.
You're supposed to see it. Okay, we go. Briefly about the methodology, because I don't have a standalone slide of that. We had 627 people sample in our online panel. We do this specifically. We do not represent the population, urban population of Belarus. We are the change tracker, therefore we try to follow the trends in the society, and therefore in order to ensure comparativeness and to track trends, what trends are big, what small, we align our sample with the population. We use our online panel for that. Therefore, we did not show the size of the segments for these reasons because they are definitely different from a real segment sizes. If we had a different data collection methodology, we show the changes in the trends and inside segments. There we can see the adamant opponents of the regime, what are the trends there, and we can say the same for other segments. We can say that among the opponents of the regime, they do not support Russia in the war against Ukraine, and those segments that trust or do not trust to the authorities, we can see that their popular idea is not to support any of these sides. What it is also important to say as a disclaimer, we used online methodology. We do not speak about a rural audience, and we do not have them in our sample. And we should say that there is an effect, the fear factor in the respondents, but we do not think, despite the fact that this effect can be significant, still this will not affect the outcomes of the survey. We had the survey from January 3 to 10th, and you can read more details in the report. So I have made a formal part, this disclaimer, and now we can proceed to the data. What's the trend? We can see that there is a growing trend of trusting the authorities. We can see that segments who are the supporters of the regime and those who strive to believe the authorities trust the authorities more and more, and we believe this trend to continue. The pre-election fear effect can be eliminated because we have a number of indicators that we keep track of and that have been aligned with the level of anxiety and fear. These indicators have not changed. The rejections and non-response rates dropped because this questionnaire was shorter, and the number of people who did not complete the survey the number of increased. So we should look for the reasons and political and social reasons. My colleagues dwelled on that. For example, we can say that Lukashenko and his regime are seen by a significant share of Belarusians, and we can see that the neutral part expands. So Lukashenko is perceived by them as the supplier of peace and stability. This trend is the continuation of what we could see in May, when the segment of those who would not trust the authorities, we can see that this index started growing in this cohort, and we expected that that would convert into the growth of trust to the authorities, not to Lukashenko. And this is what has happened. In addition, we can see that the index of social mood has been growing. People become more optimistic. People are more confident about the future. This index has grown this year, even in the segment of adamant opponents of the regime, and this can be also caused by the post New Year season, but still, in general, we can see that the satisfaction with the situation in the country has been growing. Before we discuss the election, we can mention other indicators that we keep track of. These are the indicators associated with the war. There are slight changes because the segments that trust the regime and that are adamant supporters, they are the most active. Probably there were many events during the monitored period. probably the occupation of the Kursk Oblast in Russia by Ukraine could affect the perceptions. Maybe there are some other factors. There is no clear explanation to these changes. We can see also that for the first time, the number of people who believe that Belarus should be participating in the war on the side of Russia. And when we started investigating what happened, we could see that this has happened in the segment of the people who think that Russia has been winning. So why has this happened? These people must think that it would be beneficial for Belarus when there is a peaceful agreement coming. It's better for Belarus to be on the side of the winner. Since they believe that Russia wins, then Belarus should join Russia until it is too late. But on the other hand, we can see that this is the minority of Belarusians who believe so. The most widespread point is that Belarus shall not participate in this war on either side, and other things like readiness to host nuclear weapons, we do not see changes. And now, speaking of election, apart from the Belarusian Change Tracker, the Chatham House survey has been published recently. It was on the election. And what we can see in the Belarus Change Tracker does not contradict what we can see in the Chatham House survey published by Rehor Astapenia, our colleague. Belarusians treat elections skeptically. Why? First of all, the voter turnout is going to be 2 times less than during the previous election. In addition, people in the Chatham House survey do not believe that the election is ideal, and the gaps are about the objectivity of the count. So about 90% of the people believe that the voter count should be objective, and Chatham House says that 83% of respondents believe that it will be fair. The same gap is seen in the access of candidates with various views, independent candidates, access of candidates to mass media. The only segment that believes that Lukashenko is going to win the election and the election will be ideal are loyalists. So we can say that Chatham House describes the feeling of decisiveness. We can see that a significant share of Belarusians believe that the election outcome is already known. The supporters of Lukashenko are okay with this. They believe that our candidate is the strongest and he's going to win. But still, there is such a feeling that the election outcome has already been determined, and there's a gap between expectations and reality. Show that Belarusians are quite skeptical about the current election, and Lukashenko will get the legitimacy only in the eyes of his adamant supporters, and the rest of them, the rest of the audience, the rest of the people in the country will need other justifications for his authority. Also, the respondents expect that the appraisals would drop, and the Chatham House people, the Chatham House respondents, did not believe in this. But we shall dive into the context of Belarusians. Non-normality of the social conflict and continued harsh environment is what is seen. Chatham House did not provide this divide, but this was in the previous seasons, and hardly anything changed. But for the people who are adamant opponents of the regime and those who read the oppositional news, and the rest of the people live in the relative normality mode. Yes, people are aware that if you express a wrong political position, you can be prosecuted, but I believe that the people are not aware of the scale of how much it has been, the scale of this in 2024 and 2025. It's clear that if you go into the street and you wave a white, red, and white flag in the street, you will be put into prison. But still, the majority of the respondents did not see this anxiety. The majority of the respondents say that there is no social tension. So we can see that there are people who do not really believe. So the question was, what do you expect? Anything of the below to happen this year? And there are people who do not believe into any thawing. They are adamant opponents, and there are people who believe that the government will really unfrost the situation. And also, there are people who believe that those who are in exile will get back to the country. And adamant supporters of the regime do not expect that those in exile are so much guilty. And they show the trust to the authorities. And what's interesting, maybe this unfrosting has any prospects in order to rotate this hatred, because for the first time in our observations, we use the Bocardus scale on the social distancing, and for the first time we can see significant difference between the supporters of the regime and opponents of Lukashenko. A similar trend is observed by the survey organized by me and Konstantin Strovich under the FS Foundation, and we are going to have a publication in February. Therefore, we believe that this can be something like that. We will keep an eye on that, whether this trend continues in the future. But we can see these curves of decreasing social distancing to the opponents from the regime supporters. So probably loyalists will be less active in non-accepting their political opponents. The election is the important event in political life of Belarus, but this is still a very acute issue for those who support Lukashenko, and there is still a trend of the growing trust to the regime institutes. So we will see the developments, we will see the situation, but if the economic situation does not really change in the coming future, then I would expect for this growth to continue, or for the current situation to be sticking to some plateau. That's it from my side. Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, Philip. And right now, we are about to start the Q&A session, and the first question goes to Lev Lvovskiy. What's the list of the investor countries that ensure FDIs, and how in the reporting period we could see the effect in the economy? I beg your pardon? Yes. Speaking of the top 5 investors, probably I will not name all of them, but it all starts with Belarusians or Belarusians who pretend to be the citizens of Cyprus. Cyprus is always in the top list of investors. Well, part of those are Russian citizens, but certainly none of them is a true person with this Cypriot origin. Top 2, naturally, is Russia, and the rest, they are very small. China is top 5, but this is like 5%. Therefore, significant foreign direct investment is still occupied by the European Union but the most significant ones are Russia and Belarusians residing in safer jurisdictions abroad. How sanctions affected the economy? Well, it can take us hours to discuss it, but certainly there was a negative effect in 2022. We could see a significant drop down of the economy, but not as heavy as it was expected or had been expected initially. So sanctions have a direct and negative effect. We lost the Ukrainian market. We have no longer access to the Klaipeda seaport. We lost half of the European market. But the majority of that has been compensated by Russia, by a large demand from Russia. Quantity-wise, Belarus seems good, and if we take a look at real salaries, we have super achievements versus 2021. Real salaries grew by 25%. But if we speak about diversification of exports, about the opportunity of the economy to withstand the shocks, these are quality indicators, then our economy deteriorated quality-wise and has become fragile. Another question, it goes to Lev again. You've mentioned that in 2024 there was a growth of the economy. That the economy grew by 4% and then it slowed down. However, according to the data, the GDP growth for the same year was 4%. Yes. How this combines with the slowdown, that's the situation. In 2024, our economy grew by 4%. All this growth, all this has been achieved in the first 5 months of 2024. So we grew to that level, and then we stayed at that level. So allegedly speaking, our GDP seasonally adjusted in December versus the GDP in May was basically the same. So versus May, we stopped growing, but we sustained the growth achieved during the first half year. Okay, thank you. There's a little reminder. If you have any questions on domestic or foreign policy, please ask them within the next 5 minutes. And then the presenter will have to disconnect, and we have questions. The questions to all presenters, and who will answer. Should we wait for any thawing in 2025 in Belarus, and will they create conditions and environment for NGOs to exist? Those who do not oppose Lukashenko's regime. This question goes to Gennady and Artyom, I believe. Okay, I can start. Undoubtedly, there's a big question of what we should call thawing or unfrosting. But I would say that after the election, right after the election, we can expect a light decrease in the reprisals pressure. However, we will not see a significant liberalization because there are multiple factors. It's not clear why a regime should do that and what regime should be offered to do that. What should be the incentives for the regime to facilitate, to turn Lukashenko's regime to abandon reprisals. And the very system of repression, law enforcers and security, starting from the state prosecutor's office to anti-corruption and anti-drug trafficking units, they use reprisals to show their loyalty to the regime. Therefore, we can envisage that reprisals will slightly decrease after the election, but we cannot be speaking about liberalization, unfrosting, or thawing after the election. That's not the trend. That's not the trajectory. I fully agree with Gennady, but I would mention the foreign policy dimension, the regime may need to relaunch the dialogue with the West, and starting such an unfrosting like allowing registration of NGOs, media, recalling the anti-extremist laws, and releasing over 1,000 political prisoners. Well, certainly these steps will be valued by the West even more as a significant gesture or sign, rather than the registration of some number of NGOs, than returning political immigrants. And we can hardly envisage that. Even if we imagine such a positive track, we will have to see a lot of milestones in 2025 in this direction in order for these things to happen. We can hardly expect this to happen, and if we can certainly refer to biological reasons of political change, and this biological change of the regime can happen in the next 5 to 7 years, and there are no reasons to make the regime softer. Another question. Will there be any impact on the public opinion, like the OSCE report on election observation, or will a role be played by the public observers? Okay, I'm going to answer this question since it was about public opinion. Certainly, the public is not enthusiastic about a presidential election. People are much more skeptical about the election. Therefore, in an attempt to show that somebody observed the election, this will be perceived in the same modality as any other information on the election. So the supporters of Lukashenko will see this as another additional factor to prove that everything is good. The rest of the people will not treat this seriously if there are any observers, because the understanding of objectivity and the access of various candidates, these are intertwined issues, and inviting any of the observers to the election when the majority of the public believe that other people are not allowed into the country or in the political domain, that will hardly change the situation. From the public opinion point of view, I don't think that this will be a significant factor changing the opinion of people if there are observers invited to the election. And I think that this election will be similar to what happened in 2015 during the presidential election. There was no such an influence back then, and this will not be the influence now. Okay, do we have any other questions? No more questions. And I would like to remind you that the links to this report, published in English and Russian, will be emailed to our participants. And if there are no more questions, then we would like to appreciate all those who participated in the presentation. Thank you for making this huge effort, and we would like to remind you that this project has been implemented in partnership in the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. We thank you all, and we say goodbye.